Thank you. Trustee Lee Reader. Leader President Gilbert. Abdus.
Here.
Baines.
Here.
Mirandus.
Here.
Perez.
Present.
Smith.
Here.
Thank you. Elena, you're not.
United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'll move to approve the agenda. Second.
Okay, motion to approve the agenda by trustee Abdus, seconded by trustee Baines. Board secretary, please take the roll.
Trustee Lee Reader.
Aye.
Gilbert.
Aye.
Abdus.
Aye.
Baines.
Aye.
Mirandus.
Aye.
Perez.
Aye.
Smith.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. Approved.
Motion passes. Moving on. Does anybody have any conflicts of interest in today's agenda? Here, moving on to presentations. Any presentations?
No presentations this morning.
Okay. Nope, scheduled presentations. On to public comments. Do we have any public comments?
No more submitted prior to the meeting.
Okay. On to informational items. I'll turn items 4.1 through 4.3 to General Manager King.
Thank you. Good morning, board. This month's been busy with putting together the budget, doing year and closeout stuff, and then a lot of progress on core meetings and just getting ready for the budget. So we had our committee meetings presented to the finance committee, and then we'll talk more about the budget on item 6.1, the draft budget for 23-24. Also getting in contract and getting in place with and we'll talk about this in the revenue part, with MBS for the fee administration for 23-24. We've executed the agreement that the board authorized last month that MBS will administer the fee, and then SCI will continue to do the assessment. And so we've been working with SCI as well on the modification to our existing assessment with the rate, like we talked about previously, to reduce the rate down to about 60% of the current assessment rate. So we'll talk about that in the revenue portion. I have nothing further to add on the GM report unless there's questions on the information provided.
Okay.
One question. Within your manager's report, there's an update by reach of construction scheduling. One of the questions I get asked regularly is, when is all this going to be done? Can that be added in that section? It looks like it's maybe 25.
It's a bit of a moving target, but we do have on the reaches the planned schedule, and there are some delays. The original project completion date was 2025, but it looks like it's heading towards 26, 27 potentially, and there may need to be at the SAFCA level or the city county level a revision to the legislation for that project to extend the timeline, because they're making substantial progress. But Gabe can answer more questions, and I think we typically add in the anticipated construction date. Yeah.
Well, Tom, the other thing to keep in mind too, there's several dates that are important. I think people care. They care about the completion of construction, but I think they care more about when the FEMA remapping is complete. And that's sometime after completion of construction. And I'm wondering, are you talking about as far as the date, is there an effort, maybe this is a question for Scott too, is there an effort to move the SB5, I guess, deadline for 200 yield level by 2025?
There is, maybe I can do a little bit of background because not everyone might even
Yeah,
know
it'd be good.
about the terminology. So SB5 was a statute passed back in 2006 or 7, somewhere around there. It imposes a requirement for urban areas in the Central Valley that they either have achieved or be on progress to achieve a 200-year level of protection. The deadline to do that is by 2025. That deadline has been extended twice, once for the Stockton area for Lathrop, Manteca, pushed back to 2028. West Sacramento last year under SB 901 was pushed back to 2030. There is a current bill in the legislature that would extend the deadline further for those two communities. Safeco elected not to participate in the bill to have it cover the Natomas area because it wasn't convinced that it will need an extension. And the reason to not participate is that the state requires if you get an extension, you provide an extra indemnity to the state to get that extension. And since Safeco didn't know that it would necessarily need it, it isn't participating at this point. If it turns out that it needs it, it'll be able to push that through the legislature pretty easily because of the short extension. The bill SB 586 by Eggman, which is likely to pass the Senate floor in the next week or two, changes it from a hard date deadline to as long as you're making adequate progress with the Army Corps of Engineers deadline. So if the Corps continues to fund and construct, then the deadline just keeps getting pushed out. Is that what you're looking for?
Yeah, thank you for that.
Sure.
And our number now is 27.
So for every place in the state, unless it received an extension, every place in the Central Valley, unless it received an extension, it's 2025. And so that's Natomas and Sacramento's deadline is 2025. According to Rick Johnson, the last time I talked to him, the concern isn't that the construction will be done. The concern is the as-built to demonstrate that the construction is done might not be done. And so he believes construction will be done by 2025.
But even still, you're saying there's legislation to sort of massage the deadline, the 2025 deadline to mean as long as you're making adequate progress. So assuming
with the Corps, but it only applies to 2 geographic areas.
West
Sacramento
Sacramento
and the Lathrop, Manteca, Stockton area.
Oh.
So that legislation would have to be amended after it passes in a future year to add Natomas if Safeco determined it needed it.
And one more question. The other question I get a lot is when can we drop flood insurance? Is that at the end of the FEMA approval? Because it's not at the end of construction.
Yeah, so the follow-up with construction and the need for the as-built drawings is for the letter of map revision submittal to FEMA.
Correct.
And so that aligned originally when the project kicked off, that's the 2025 deadline. And we would actually submit for the first review in 2024. We're not there yet because there's construction still ongoing. Once the letter of map revision is submitted to FEMA, approved and back, if we are certified at 200-year flood protection, and that's the goal, then the hope is that mandatory flood insurance would no longer be required for the basin.
And if I can add to what Kevin said, I agree with completely. 2 quick points. One, this ties back to the garden highway vegetation issues because those have to be dealt with in order to get MBK to do the certification to FEMA. And secondly, my personal hope is we can convince people to continue to carry insurance, just not have it be mandatorily required because obviously it is a best practice.
Any other questions on the general manager's report? But you can leave that one there.
Kevin. I was ready to get any update on that letter that we received from the residents of the Cove.
Yeah, so they did follow up. So we followed up with them after the letter. And then we heard back from the gentleman that sent the original one, and he garnered another 40 signatures. What we have already in place, we have on the schedule to do a cleanup starting Monday in that area with PD. So it takes about 3 to 4 weeks for us to go through the process, and we meet with the city every week. Gabe goes down there and meets with the impact team and PD and the resource officers. We get on the schedules and they discuss all the priorities for the limited resources that they have. And so the city has some needs of their own. Obviously, we have our priority list. So we establish a priority. And so we're about every 3 to 4 weeks if we have major cleanup. And so immediately after receiving their letter, we reached out to them. We got it on the priority list. We did the notification. So I think I sent an email out to all the trustees about the locations and the plan. And so May 15th, provided that PD is still available and something else doesn't come up, it's posted, it's marked, and we're ready to go on the 15th to start the cleanup. Following up on that, we've already put in the request to finish up on the NIMDEC. We already had in process the priority list for the cleanup and did the notification prior to receiving their letter last month for starting at Arden Garden and working up eventually all the way up to Sotnip. We got a good stretch of that cleared 2 weeks ago, and we removed over 105,000 pounds of trash in that area. And we started, this is what we budgeted for this year, and it's been a long winter. And so we budgeted for increased security patrol. And so now we're patrolling the NIMDEC 24/7 along that stretch to prevent reestablishment. And so it's successful. That there hasn't been anything reestablished, and we're getting up at least all the way to Sotnip, and then things kind of peter out. Once you get past Sotnip going north, there's a lot of dumping, but not a lot of homeless encampments. And so that we call and just we'll pick it up on our regular routine pickup, unless it's a car or a boat that gets disposed sometimes, or a trailer, and then CHP will respond to that and go from there. So we're working our way up. Started on Arden Garden because we had it in the works, in the pipeline, so to speak. The code is starting on the 15th, and then we're back to NIMDEC and then using our security services to continually patrol there. So we're finally starting to see some good progress there. So I hope that was a long answer to a short question, but
Yeah, it's just when you go by the meeting.
yeah, and yeah, they've let us know. We've been in contact. They were appreciative of us, reaching out, and they understood the process. It just doesn't happen overnight. Like, we don't have that authority to do it overnight. But hopefully, once we have them relocated to different areas with our security patrolling, we'll keep them from reestablishing. That's the aim.
Kevin, can I ask a question on that relative to budget expenditures on cleanup and security? How are we doing on budget to actuals relative to these costs? Right?
Yeah, I'll show you when we get to item 6.1. I don't want to off the top of my head.
Okay,
when we get
if it's
there,
on that, yeah.
I have the actuals for this year expended. We haven't spent nearly the amount that we anticipated for security patrol last year, because it took us this long to get in with the city and have those weekly meetings and start priority. And then we had winter. Yeah, we had a really busy flood season, and so we couldn't even go and do those postings because we're literally on flood fight. So, and our crews were split day and night, and so we just put it on pause. So the actual spent in the security patrol and cleanup, we've been doing weekly cleanups, and that isn't necessarily a line item budgeted expense, because what we're doing, it's basically accounted for in labor, because we're doing it with our own crews. And so that time's already accounted for, whether they're doing cleanups or mowing or something else, it's already budgeted there. So you won't see a line item expense just for cleanup, but we do dedicate, particularly now out of flood season, 1 day a week that we clean up go around the entire district just on trash pickup.
Yeah, I think we've talked about this. We'll talk about it on the item. When I looked at the budget to actual 5.4, I couldn't see that part, and
when we get to the budget part, 6.1, I'll
do we track it though? Do we actually track the cleanup intern? Like, there is a way where you allocate. Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah.
And in Gabe's report on 4.2, we can go to that if there's no other questions on the GM report.
Yeah.
He calculates the hours spent for cleanup work. So I'll show you there in that item 2.
Yeah, but that's that. Well, yeah, that's fine.
Onto the operations manager.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so. Good morning. Yeah, so we've been doing a lot of mowing activities and road repairs. And along with cleanup activities, like Kevin mentioned, the cleanup activities along the NEM deck. We're out there for 4 to 5 days, along with Forensic Clean, which is the agency that provides hand picking as far as, picking up hazardous waste, needles. We don't do that, so they assist us with that, which was huge. So yeah, we had a lot of time spent there. Like Kevin mentioned, we posted additional areas, one being East Drainage Canal at Gateway, and then the Cove. So we'll attack those areas next week. Right now, we're just focusing on mowing for the most part. Obviously, the wet winter has caused the vegetation to grow exponentially, so it's going to take some time to get that taken care of. And as far as the homeless encampment cleanups, you can go down. I do have a chart basically showing how much money we spent on unauthorized encampment activity, along with hours. So if you go to during the month of April, we spent 224 hours related to unauthorized encampment activities, and then
Page 19.
yeah, and then year to date, 847 hours for unauthorized encampment activities. So yeah, we spent quite a bit of time with this, and then along with the garbage pickup once a week. It's a lot of time spent, but it does help. It does help the district somewhat. We don't want to devote too many resources, but at the same token, we don't want garbage everywhere around the district. Other than that, if you have any additional questions, feel free to ask.
Yeah, I have
Oh, go ahead, Tom.
a question on the pumping. Plant number 3 showed that pump number 2 operated for 400 hours and moved 1,800 acre feet, but the rainfall was only roughly 1,300
It's
acre
just
feet.
residual water coming from the fields.
Is it, okay. It just didn't make sense to me as how much we were pumping. So first of all, it's not an error that we are, and it was just plant 3. So anyway, I noticed that. Maybe you could make a note for me next time, because that's one of the things I'm trying to get a sense of how much we pump versus how much falls in the district.
Absolutely.
It's once again, it's that engineering thing that the mind never stops trying to figure stuff out, even if there's not a problem there. So
Too, we could run multiple pumps and less hours pumped, right? But it's just.
And one of the things when we calculate that amount,
it was the volume that caught my attention.
right.
As we pumped 1,800 and only 1,300 fell.
And it's just so you know, Tom, and the rest of the board, we don't have flow measurement on our discharge pipes. It's something that we may work towards in our SCADA plan and instrumentation to get good numbers. So it's a calculated based on the run hours and the kilowatt hour from the pump curve. It's a calculated amount. It's not an actual measured amount. And so that has some error in it inherently as well, especially because the pumps don't necessarily, you're basically calculating it as if it was a brand new pump and not discounting the fact that there's been degradation over time, or there's cavitation in the pumps and stuff like that, and different total dynamic head depending on canal elevations. We can do a better job calculating that, but just keep in mind it's really illustrative, and the two don't necessarily always correlate between rainfall and pump volume. Any other questions for Gabe or myself on ops report?
Good morning again. It's been a relatively quiet month for council.
Two items that we've touched this month is Rebecca Smith has been working on a development agreement issue, working under the direction of Paul Devereaux, who continues to be a retired annuitant for the district. And then you may be aware, and newer board members may not, that there is a long outstanding lawsuit, Store versus City of Sacramento, relating to a tragic accident when a bicyclist hit one of the gates coming onto a levee. And that's all associated with a city trail. And so the city provides defense and indemnity to the district. It's not our obligation. The city does it, but we occasionally get documents that have to be reviewed. And this month there was one that Kevin and I both looked at. So that was about it for the month. I know, Nick, you're really curious about that lawsuit now. I can see it in your eyes. Okay.
The city's tendering the defense and it was our transfer. And so, yeah, there's just additional discovery items asking for additional information. So that's the nature of the request and response that we provided this month.
Well, Tom gets to nerd out on engineering stuff.
Yeah,
I get to nerd out on
Totally fine.
law stuff.
Nick, I'll follow up with you after the board meeting, just so, yeah.
How about lunch, dude?
All right, so that's it for the informational items. I'll turn it back over to the board for consent calendar items 5.1 through 5.4.
Okay, I'll entertain a motion to move the consent calendar.
So,
Okay.
So
Okay, motion to approve the consent calendar by trustee Barandez and seconded by trustee Gilbert. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
I'm slow.
Okay.
Sorry.
Oh, so that was a yes. It was, okay.
That was
Okay,
a
items
yes
passed by unanimous
for-
consent on to scheduled items.
Okay, I wasn't ready on the button.
Okay, 6.1.
Thank you. So before you today, item 6.1 is our draft fiscal year 23-24 budget. We'll spend a little bit of time walking through the budget highlights. The intent is to receive feedback from the board today and return at our June board meeting for approval of and adoption of our budget prior to our fiscal year beginning in July of 23. There are some changes from last year's budget that I do want to point out, particularly in the revenue side. So this is the pre-introduction stuff because it is public documents. So we like people, if they pick it up, to be able to understand about the organization. The budget summary in this year, as compared to last year, we had knowingly wanted to we were unbalanced in our budget last year, where our expenditures were going to exceed revenue. And that was strategic for a couple different items, outreach with the Prop 218, as well as making some progress on our capital improvement plan. So we were spending known and approved in this year's adopted budget to spend out of capital to get some pre-engineering work done. As it turns out, we will be, so this is just net expense to revenue. And so we're pretty close to, obviously the estimated year end is only 860 difference as compared to our budgeted amount and anticipated of 4 million. And so we didn't spend as much as we had anticipated, that 8.3 million as compared to the total expenditures of 5.4. I'll get into more of these details. That's just kind of a big overview. I do want to talk about revenues first. In the proposed budget for this year, our current O&M assessment, our special assessment that's been in place since 1992, we are currently set at the maximum rate as approved by the voters for that assessment. And that rate is 7.5 cents per assessed value. Embedded in that rate is a minimum annual charge of $25. So there are a lot of small parcels that, and this is afforded in the way we do things. And we talked about this during the development of the new fee, but there's a minimum charge of $25. So for administrative purposes. However, we don't need that full assessment. And we talked about the fee replacing some of the income so that it's a pay for service arrangement now. So those areas in the district that don't receive any stormwater services from the district, there's about 4,000 parcels that don't, they would only pay the existing assessment, but at a reduced rate. And some of those, a large portion, are at the minimum $25 charge. What we're working with SCI on is to, and we'll come back when we adopt these rates in August, July or August, before we put it on the rolls, is to change that to a minimum of $10, because that equates directly to a 60% reduction. That in this proposal is another 60% reduction from the 7.5 cents down to 3 cents. And that actually works out from the 25 down to $10. The single family residents would receive the same, that are at that minimum 25, they'd receive the same 60% reduction as everyone else based on assessed value. So we think that's fair. I'll come back with a full report on that. You don't have to make a decision on that today, but that's what we're building into the budget. And that throws off about $986,000 in assessment revenue, down from $2.4 million. On the flip side, the second part of our new revenue stream we've built in, and these are based on, keep in mind, this is based on last year's assessed value. So the numbers could change once we get the actuals in, because there are a lot of development projects and there's a lot of inventory of housing that are being sold that are, the assessed value will be higher once the new assessment roll comes in. So we budgeted in based on 22-23 assessment roll, and that would throw off a little over $3 million. Keep in mind that we had in the plan originally, we were targeting $3.3 million in revenue from the fee. We had already approved the engineer's study and established the rate in that, and we discovered that we had the error on the 145 properties in Sutter that were miscalculated as vacant as opposed to ag, and so that hit the 3.3 million as if they were vacant, but rightfully so, they should have been in the ag category. So that's why we're a little off in the revenue projection, but that the assessment and why we're keeping it at that is so we hit our total funding projection of about 5.5 million. So 3 million, a million almost from the assessment, and then the $1.4 million from SAFECA and CCAD2. We did negotiate and finalize an agreement a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. We finalized the agreement, and now we have an escalator of 2% in that. So we've built that in, and so that throws off another about $20,000 in revenue, and that'll keep escalating. The CCAD2 contract terminates in 2041. So SAFECA still has some obligation to fund O&M. They'll have to probably work on some other mechanism, but keep in mind our existing assessment could also be raised back up to that maximum rate should we need it, so that we stay solvent in full. But we'll get to that with SAFECA in a few years. 5 to 8 years from now, we'll start talking about the other continuation of CCAD2. Lastly, we have put in a budget of, the FMAP's $421,000 for this year. We've already submitted the advanced funding request. This doesn't necessarily match up with the audited financials, because the way the timing of the FMAP agreement, so Rob and the accountants, you'll see it differently, but for budgeting purposes in our mind and when the work's going to be done, we put it here with an offsetting expense in the FMAP category. So for this year, it's 421. We have submitted for a FEMA reimbursement and OES reimbursement. So we're anticipating about $100,000 from that. And hopefully, that'll come through. And the miscellaneous 4.5 million is the community project fund from Vera's office. There's an offsetting expense to that of 25% in the capital area for purchase. That would be our local cost share. I have reached out to Bear's office this week to find out where that stands. I saw your email and I looked on his website and it didn't appear that that we were on the list of 15. So I'm investigating that, and I don't know the date of on his website, the date of those 15 projects. So they did extend the deadline for us over that weekend. And so I'm waiting to hear back from them. If that didn't get submitted in the final budget coming back to you guys in June, this will be removed. Like if we're not on the list, then it's not anticipated. But I do want to follow up again to see how we can be more successful, have a better chance next year with more planning and time to submit it. Because we were literally counting our 218 ballots, and his office called me and was like, surprised didn't see you. So I worked over the weekend and we didn't have time to get letters of support from others. And so it was like, get the information in by Sunday. So we'll really press for this next year if we're not on the list. So I was a little disappointed in that too. And that is to purchase 4 backup generators, 2 mobile and 2 stationary for Plant 8 that we would just hold at our courtyard until Plant 8, project kicks off, which we're about 2 years away from. So. Any questions on revenue? All right.
Security patrol reimbursement, does that have to do with the Central Valley flood protection?
No, the security patrol reimbursement revenue is the cost share agreement with Natomas Mutual and TMBC. So they pay, in years past, prior to us upping the amount for security patrol to do our own 24/7, they pay about 1/3 of the cost. Each district or each agency paid 1/3. You could always add on additional services, like if you were having a particularly large rash of events, like Natomas Mutual had some break-ins at their corporation yard, pretty, like 4 weeks back to back to back. And so Brett contacted us and said, hey, can we have them come by here? So they pay a little bit more in that regard. And so we break it out, but this is the agreement. So the overall contract's about $90,000. We get 60, 30 from each. So, and in fact, I have a meeting set up with TNBC and Natomas Mutual next week to talk about that agreement and the security patrol. TNBC has had a lot of issues lately and they want to talk about it, but I'll report back on where that ends up. I have some thoughts on what's best for the district in that agreement, particularly with us going up and down NIMDEC is where we see the most problem. And we've invested in our, in fact, the video surveillance systems now function at Plant 8. So we get live video. So we don't necessarily need to have security patrol drive by there, once a night. So anyway, more information there, but that's where that revenue comes from.
Could I ask why Metro Airport is a separate line item? I'm assuming that's not the airport itself.
So this is an agreement that we have with the city, the county for pumping at Metro Airport. So they reimburse us. It's our facility, but it only serves Metro Airports. This is a long-standing agreement with the development group at Metro Airport that, and with the county, that it's our facility, we pay the utility bill, and then they reimburse us for actual expense.
And Tom, just to be clear, Metro Airpark is like an 1,800-acre industrial park next to the airport. So it's not Metro Airport, it's Metro Airpark. So
Curious as to why they're separate, where none of the
Well-
developments, the airport isn't separate.
well, because RD 1000 isn't providing the type of services that.
That's right. Yeah, so it was an agreement that the district entered into in the early 90s, I think, with the county, that the county would, based on the development impacts and the facilities that were built, that they would fund the pumping, to reimburse the pumping. So that one's like a special, we don't have any others like that.
Okay, one other question. I noticed that the amount went down, but the area of impervious has gone up
Yeah, so
recently with new warehouses. So just curious as to why the amount went down.
Yeah, we are budgeting lower. This is just based on the wet year. The actuals of 47,000 to end the year was because we had such a wet winter and required more pumping. So I look at kind of a 5-year average of those expenses, and that's the other thing too. When we get to the power portion of our expenditures, we have 2 wet years in there, 2 dry years in there, and kind of a medium year. So it's a good representative look. And I just take a running 5-year average and budget that because we just don't know how much pumping is going to be required. So that year we're budgeting about $30,000, which is a middle of the road. Some years, looking back, the expense was less than $19,000 for measuring or pumping. So
And the opposite of our budget.
there's an offsetting expense. Yep. On to, so just a chart for projected revenues.
Kevin, just
Yes,
this
sir.
quick thing. I think a day or two ago, I noticed the governor's office previewed some items that might come out of the May revise today. And I saw an item that says funding for LMAs. I don't know if are you aware of anything that might be.
Yeah, so and Scott might have a better idea. No, it's okay. But a lot of that's no, that's fine, Scott. We aren't earmarked for anything in that, and we'll certainly look at it. But a lot of that is we're still uncertain about FMAP funding for next year as well. In fact, we haven't seen a request for proposal yet. We're waiting for the budget to come out. I do know that there's some other assistance because of all the flooding statewide this year that they wanted to provide some assistance, and that could be part of disaster recovery. But we'll look into it more. But we haven't been working with the governor's office on anything there, and probably more the Central Valley Flood Protection Board is where that money is going to go to. And there are some other outstanding disaster recovery things in other LMAs. So we're not on that list, I don't believe. And so, but we continue to beat the door down on every grant or funding opportunity that we can come up with. We have submitted for the pilot program for the cleanup, the $460,000 to the Central Valley Flood Protection Board. I haven't heard back on that request yet. I think it's in their review. It takes them a couple months usually on those things to get it in front of the Central Valley Flood Protection Board for approval. So there's some funding hopefully coming there too. On to operations and maintenance expense. We'll go through and keep in mind for the full board, as you know, we've been working with all the committees on personnel, as well as finance and operations to come up with these recommendations. And so there was consensus at each committee meeting as we built the budget and the expected expenditures. We had those detailed discussions. And so what you see here is an accumulation of the recommendations from each committee based on what was presented to them. In detail, I'll just go over the personnel expenditures here. The major highlights in personnel, there's a 5.5% COLA. It's based on the February CPI. The personnel committee reviewed that and made the recommendation to move forward with that in the proposed budget. Group health insurance is going up. It's about a 10% increase year over year. And we do have some, that one's kind of a moving target as well. Depends on open enrollment, which happens in time frame. Some employees will either come on or go off depending on their personal situation, whether they have coverage from a spouse or not. And so the expense this year went up because we had an employee join back on that hadn't previously done it. So that was they had coverage to their spouse, but then they enrolled. And so that's a bit of a moving target. We get pretty close, and then it's about a 10% increase in premiums year over year. The pension expense, this is plus about $62,000 in pension expense. Some really good news, and I shared this with the finance committee. Since I got here as a general manager, we've been making progress towards paying down our unfunded liability. In fact, we have three groups of employees. We have tier one, which are like the legacy, long tenured employees here. Then we have tier two, which are classic employees. That's the 2% at 60. And then we have the PEPRA employees, those that are after pension reform in 2017, 13. So with all new hires or that haven't worked in PERS before come in at the PEPRA. The good news is the tier two and the PEPRA employees, unfunded liability is completely paid off. In fact, we have between those two accounts about a $35,000 credit with PERS based on the last actuarial. The tier one has about $900,000 in unfunded liability right now, so just under $1 million. When I came to the district, we were on a 30-year amortization schedule. Because we had some other expenditure reductions and we were really paying attention, we started paying, and CalPERS offered a fresh start program to pay that off. But once you get into that program, you have no flexibility. You're stuck in it and you have to make those payments. So one of the things that we do here is for financial flexibility is don't, paint yourself into a corner, but aggressively try to pay that down. And because the returns in PERS are actually higher than LAIF and everywhere else. So instead of paying interest and amortization schedule, we actually, once we establish a credit, then it's like pay as you go every year. So our intent in this year's budget, after working with the finance committee and personnel committee, was to work on. So we've been working 30 years when I first got here. Then we were on like 10 to 15 year, looking to see what we can afford. We can go to a 5-year amortization schedule and make the additional payment towards unfunded liability will be paid off in 5 years, depending on PERS performance. And the total interest savings to the district will accumulate more than $400,000 in savings by doing that, as opposed to paying schedules. So we're working not only on revenue side, but expenditure side. The nice thing is we're not officially signed up in a different program with PERS. If something happens and we have a flood fight or some other expense, we can always just go back to our 30-year schedule or some other in-between amount. So the plan right now is to have all of our unfunded liability paid off in 5 years. In fact, 2 of the tiers are already done. So I think it's good news. And for a modest increase in the annual expense, to have the savings in the end is the recommendation. And also, there's a slight increase in, because PERS performance, and keep in mind this is based on the actuarial done in June 2022. We'll have a new one in June 23. And so we're always about a year behind. The expected return in PERS wasn't as great as it had been in 21 and 20. And so there's like a 2% increase in the tier one employees for the required employer contribution. So it went from like 10 to 12%. And then the others, like the PEPRA employees, with like less than 1% increase in contribution. So that's the other part of the pension expense that's going up, not just the unfunded liability.
Yeah, Kevin, I just want bigger picture, just in case anybody out there will be listening to this. I mean, a lot of this is, a lot of in the weeds stuff, honestly, pretty eye glazing over. But when you kind of, no, it's important stuff, because I think the bottom line and what the takeaway should be is that, we are good stewards of, the taxpayer dollars, that we're operating this organization in a responsible and competent manner. Obviously we have certain obligations to CalPERS, and I think we're meeting those as it relates to, the reworking we talked about earlier on the revenue side, relative to ratcheting down the assessment to property owners. I mean, that's an important thing to remember, that as we went out for the assessment, that really did represent a worst case scenario. We didn't know if it was going to pass, but the plan, certainly in my own mind was going to be this, and there will be significant benefit to taxpayers on it. So I think we're going to get into the operation side. So why don't you go into that? I'm going to have some more questions on that.
Yeah, in operations, there's not much to note. I talked about the power expense, and we looked at running 5-year average of our power expense. It literally depends on how many atmospheric rivers we get. This year we had 14 in Northern California, so we pumped a lot of water, as you guys know. most of the repairs, we did all the major repairs to the chains and guides last year at plant B or 1A and B at plant 8. There's new chains and guides at 3 and 4. We're in good shape now. I mean, keep in mind, those need to be replaced about on our schedule for the CIP plan every 5 to 10 years and doing the inspections. It'd been over 20 years since we've replaced them. So this is another, like we're getting ahead on that maintenance so we have less run to failure. We do have some expense anticipated at plant 2 because of the electrical explosion that we had. We're working on an estimate. Hopefully that'll be offset by the expense from FEMA and OES for reimbursement. But we do need to repair that regardless of whether we receive the reimbursement. And that might lag too, right? It takes them some years for project closeout to actually receive those funds. But we do need to make that repair to plant 2 and new motor control panel there. So we're working on that estimate, and you'll see that in here for plant 2 repairs, about $120,000 to get that back into running order. There is a large lead time on purchasing that equipment, about 8 months. So once the budget's approved, we actually may even be able to place the order now, but we don't have to pay anything until it actually gets here. And so we hopefully will get that, February timeframe if it comes, but there's a large lead time on that purchase. Nothing else really to note in operations, kind of status quo. We've been hitting our target pretty well on that. We do have, again, the power consumption there. We are continuing our effort on the herbicide budget and doubling our efforts there from the past 2 years. It's starting to pay dividends. We saw, with all the rain and stuff we had this year, we saw half of the amount of debris at our wraps. So that's beneficial as well. And it prolongs the life of the chains and guides and the mechanical equipment at the pumping plants. So that program is really, really working. And that's it for operations. In fact, we're about 30,000 less than last year's budget, just looking at our actuals and what we need to do.
That's great. So Kevin, if I may, so obviously a lot of mowing happening. It looks great out there. I am curious, you get these news tidbits of when jurisdictions are hiring, goats and sheep to come out and graze these areas. And I'd like to, can you kind of quickly touch on, our use of that method of weed abatement and whether it actually results in any cost savings?
That method of weed abatement is very beneficial. We've done it in 2 years in the past through the FMAP funding. The expense is very high. There's been legislation to change in the labor code for shepherds, and it nearly doubled the expense because people living out on the pasture, they essentially were working 24/7. And so in fact, we heard back from one of the grazers that we'd used in the past. He's like, hey, support this bill for us because our expense, the mandatory hourly rate or whatever, like the overtime expense was just astronomical. I mean, like $100,000 a year for a shepherd to be out there and housing and all that. So it's very costly now. They are busy. It does make sense in some areas that we have, like particularly on Garden Highway on the water side between I-5 and Northgate. There's a lot of trees in there. We can't really get in and mow, and that's where we've used them in the past. So we'll continue to look for those opportunities. But we did clean that out, and they did a fantastic job. But we don't have it included in our budget for this year.
Got it. And then relative to Sac River levee improvements on the setback burn and whatnot. I know years ago we had talked about looking at whether baling that into hay, for example, was something that was worthwhile.
We have been doing that. I think we did it again this last year.
The gentleman's supposed to start next week.
Yeah.
We developed an agreement for him to come out and mow and bale and do everything at no cost to the district.
That's great.
We could continue to do that.
Yeah, that's great. So creative stuff like that. It's on the edges, but it's cost saving measures like that.
For sure, and it can be put to good use. So that's something that was in place prior to Gabe and I getting here. So it's a good program, and we've just continued that every year. It is a little bit difficult sometimes. I think we switched since I've been here, the gentleman, maybe I'm wrong, we talked, oh, it's the same guy, okay. There was talk about maybe it wasn't worth his time, I think when Dawn was still here, but it sounds like it's still working, so.
Okay. And then the one other thing relative to the homeless issue, I understand the summaries of costs of labor that you kind of put in there. For me, it'd be helpful, like total costs that you would attribute to clean up and security for homeless encroachments onto RD 1000 facilities, only for to have that information available in conversations as we're out there in kind of the community and talking to other elected officials. We are spending a lot of resources and money and time, and it should not go unrecognized or unknown that we're doing that, because I feel like that's a big step up for RD 1000 to do that work. And frankly, some of that work should be somebody else's, meaning taxpayers are already paying for it in other ways, but anyway, I don't want to create more work for Dave, but it would be helpful. And over time, so I can kind of year over year, we
can run a report at the end of this fiscal year and just provide as an informational piece for a look back at our actual expense from the last 2 years. We do have the ability, and we do track through our timekeeping system, Replicon. We have a task order that the crews will write down their labor hours, and then we have our expense line item in our general ledger of the refuse collection and dumping. So those two combined should be pretty easy to get an annual summary of that. And we'll just give it to you as an attachment to the
and
general.
Also the refuse quantities, if that is something estimatable, that would be helpful too. It'd just be nice to have a different category that's easily accessible to.
I'm not adding refuse questions in my report, but it's the invoices are delayed. So I don't want to throw that off because annually,
I like the idea of an annual informational item. Hey, just annual
You
summary.
guys can keep that in your back pocket.
Yeah.
Fun fact sheet.
Yeah.
Not so fun.
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that. That's no problem. It just makes it difficult to call it out in the budget because we're trying to fit in certain boxes that match up with the GL, and so and keep things.
And also, can we also connect how much we're spending on security as well as the amount we're spending on trash pickup? Because the more security we have, the less trash pickup.
We should see an offsetting expense for that. Absolutely. Yep. We'll put together a nice summary from last year in comparison to the years prior. And then in admin expense, we have a few additional items in admin this year.
Kevin, can I?
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
For herbicides, how are we doing with the primrose this year? I know the super bloom is wild.
beautiful. The best year we've been had.
Yeah, and how's the budget item? Do we need to increase it more? Or?
No, I think our current level, we did have some modest increase for inflationary costs for material expense that's worked into the budget. When you compare where we're coding things and where they were budgeted last year, there was a difference of communication or thought process between us and Rob, the accountant. So that's why you see, but between those two line items, between field services and herbicide expense, those accumulate our total program. So in this year, we're trying to place it in the right category that Rob likes. So that's why you see it there, but we're not decreasing the budget. In fact, increasing a bit between those two for material cost expense. On admin side, we do have a few items additional. We did approve that contract last board MBS for the administration of the fee. And so in that assessment and fee consulting, that budget went from 20,000 and plus the additional 25 for MBS for the fee. We will go out with an RFQ later this fall once we get the assessment roles complete and have a singular contractor to administer both. And so hopefully there'll be some savings there between doing the two into the future. But timing this year, MBS completely familiar with our fee, and SCI has been doing our assessment for a long time. So to make sure we're on the assessment roll, that was the decision we discussed last month. Legal expense is about the same. We do have some election expense for this year. Did I already pass election? No, it's at the bottom. A little bit. The major difference is that our election expense is down. We don't have an election this year, but in the spring of 2024, we'll have a little bit of legal expense to start doing the mailers and doing our, Scott and Rebecca will start putting together the election digest and call for elections. So it's about what we spent in 2022. Or I'm sorry, in 2022 to get ready for the election. So we'll have a little bit of pre-work in 24 in the election expense, but that's a significant savings. Also in the public relations and direct outreach, you can see our actuals to end the year, we spent a lot of money to do our Prop 218 and really inform the property owners in the district. We don't anticipate nearly that level again. And we're going to go back down to our normal spending habits. We do have some more admin expense for office supplies and materials in a couple different line items here, but it has to do with updating our promotional materials with the new logo. And so we'll print new letterhead, we'll get some signage, we'll update our pass out materials and our swag, so to speak, when we go to community events. So that will take some expense with the new logo. But all in all, there is also $25,000 for a total compensation survey, and this was a result of a recommendation by the Finance Committee. And this just shows not only to our employees, but to the ratepayers how we land in comparison with agencies like us in total compensation for employees. We talked a lot about the COLA and then the pension expense going up, but this combines all of it. So it gives the board a data set that we can also communicate with. And so every 4 years, the district does one, and we have to benefit every 2 years in receiving back American River's survey. So we kind of get a check-in every 2 years. It's our turn now. The last one was done by American River in 2020. So we'll kick that off after the budget year starts. Liability insurance premiums up a little bit. You'll see in this year's audit, if you recall, we had 2 payments that we made for insurance. If you recall, back in November timeframe, we paid our premium, and then because of the provider, there was another payment required in April, and so that should cover us till next April. But we'll obviously have about 25,000 increase. And then lastly, our internet service here is about $20,000 increase to go to fiber optic. We've had significant outages over the past couple of years with our DSL line, where it basically shuts down the server, and everybody here at the office is, can't connect to the server. And then we're kind of like, all right, busy paperwork. So everything's digital, plus going back in the AV equipment here. We are looking to go towards the fiber optic, which is more secure to support our systems, our video equipment coming in, so that we have reliable internet service at the office. Any questions on admin expense? I'll wrap it up here in just a few minutes. Okay, we're almost there. We talked about FMAP. There's an offsetting revenue of 421. We are starting that work. We closed the bids on an RFQ and getting ready to execute a contract with Emerald Site Services as the sole respondent. They've been the one that has done all the work for us in the years past on FMAP. In fact, they're the only ones that respond to the request for proposals, which is great. And they're a good contractor. They do fantastic work. So I have that sitting on my desk to execute that contract with them and get them going in June to start working on the high hazard removal and other veg removal for the district. Consulting contracts were estimated to be down again in the technical consultants. Taking down the district's general engineering a bit. And this is a result of with our development work, they're spending a lot of time with development. We have, and you can see from the GM report, the number of developments in process. So they're spending a lot of time there. We will have KSN in the capital side doing our design work, but Mead and Hunt district general engineering wise, there's not much, especially as we kind of close out the work with the core and wrapping up. We're not having as many meetings that we had because there's only a few reaches left. So I anticipate that expense to go down a little bit. And the temporary admin, we had this in a different category last year, but this is the student intern. It helps us come in, and that's about 20,000 for the year, and it is helpful. So any questions on the consulting contracts? Okay, hearing none. Expenditure equipment, Tom Smith. This is exciting for you. We are going to anticipate purchasing a new mower this year. Our current mower is old and in disrepair, and so no, this is for a
Those are both down there. This is a John Deere.
yeah. So it's a John Deere 5115M with a mower attachment. So it's about $260,000, or I'm sorry, about $195,000 for that purchase. And then that keeps our equipment up and running. We haven't made significant equipment purchases for the district aside from the light duty vehicles that we bought a couple of years ago. In fact, last year we had no anticipated equipment expense, and we got a lot of our heavy equipment replaced through FMAP funds early on before they put it into that program. So
Size mower.
Yeah.
and then a bit for some SCADA expense in there too for equipment. And then capital expenditure wise, we still have on the books the spare transformer, waiting for it to actually be made and delivered. It's been about 14 months now. So we're fine, but we're getting that. And hopefully it'll be in this next budget year. So we'll have that expense. We're just carrying that through until it's ready to go. And at about the 1.125, this is the expense under the CIP projects. This is the expense to provide our portion for the community project fund if we do get awarded. So maybe by June, I'll have resolution of that and it won't be in there, which is fine. We'll put that money aside for Plant 8, like we planning to save, you know. And then about $750,000 for get ahead engineering on our CIP, so that when there are grant opportunities, we have quote unquote shovel ready projects that we can submit. A lot of the timelines for submittal of the solicitation package are like 30 to 45 days, and you have to be pretty ready to go. So we're spend a lot of time with KSN getting that pre-ahead engineering done so that we have projects ready to go. And office facility repair, about $75,000 put into there. We are experiencing some significant dry rot on the outside of the building that we're working on, and there's another expense higher up. So the dry rot's starting to take its toll, and so we're Jillian and I are working on the proposal to redo that and then paint. And that concludes my presentation for this morning. Thank you for having the wherewithal to go through all that. It was even more painful for those committees, but this is based on every committee recommendation. We made the modifications after the finance committee meeting with the total comp study and a couple other items that we discussed at finance. And then the only thing different in this that the finance committee didn't see was the internet, the fiber optic for 20,000. We just got that proposal 2 weeks ago. So wrapped it into your budget that you see today. So this time I'll take questions from the board. Keep in mind, this is draft. If there's consensus on anything, any modifications that need to be made, I will do that over the next month and then present the final budget for adoption at our June 16th board meeting. Keep in mind, June 16th, 1 week later.
Let's move on to the closed session item now.
All right, thank you. Scott, you are in control here now. I'm going to stop the screen share. I think. Right.
Yeah.
I will stop the recording. Pause, stop recording, right?
So coming out of closed session, the board performed an annual evaluation of its general manager, gave me priorities, which I've shared with the general manager. General manager came in for a chance to talk with the board and better understand it. We're required under state law to report out executive compensation for all general managers. And so the board, consistent with the existing approach, has awarded Kevin the same COLA that all other employees receive for the next fiscal year. And in recognition of the nights and weekends that he put in working on the Prop 218 assessment, is also awarding him 1 extra week of vacation for this year only. And so that's a week that Kevin can take with his family or, cash out or whatever he chooses to do with it, consistent with all of his other vacation. Finally, the board recognized that it feels like there may be better ways to do an evaluation. And so it's tasked the personnel committee with meeting and talking about that so that Kevin can continue to get positive and useful and constructive feedback for continuing to improve his performance. I'll also note that the board is interested in supporting executive coaching for the managers here at the district and has asked Kevin to consider that in bringing the final budget back to the board.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the feedback and the positive evaluation and the additional vacation time. I just want to clarify my understanding of that is that that will begin in fiscal year 23-24, not calendar year, right? So
Yes.
with the adoption of the budget, it would include the.
Yeah, the new budget will include the extra week.
Okay.
I have no idea how you accrue, and so
We'll
it'll
figure
accrue
that out.
instantly, and then you'll use it as appropriate.
I'll figure that out with Jolene and Rob on how we do that. But yeah, thank you. That's the end of closed session. I would entertain a motion to adjourn the board meeting. If there's bang the gavel, meeting adjourned. All right, meeting's adjourned. Thank you all so much for your time today.